This is a video about my personal way of conducting Nobel Prize level research with uh, graduate students. Uh, and in the context of, I didn't fit into normal academic standards or practices for a deliberate reason. I wanted to experiment with ways of doing research that fixed what I felt was wrong with academia overall. Is there something wrong with academic research overall? Well, we have two kinds of evidence that there is. Number one is the proliferation of journals, obviously done just so that academics can get tenure by publishing in them, and no one reads them. 99% of the articles are unread. So it's phony publishing, and so that part is clearly dishonest on the part of the academic profession as a whole. And fortunately, the general public doesn't read the stuff, or they would really worry about the money going into that so-called research. Number two, the top universities in the world, when their models are actually applied, and we're talking about fully validated and reliable models where every variable has been tested statistically for validity and reliability, when these top models are applied, the results are zero, just nothing. Um, and so, and I'm talking about Harvard and the models I know in artificial intelligence and creativity and innovation there. When applied by very sincere, competent private sector organizations, after years and millions spent, nothing. Absolutely, I mean, the copying a Japanese hot product 8 years after it was a hit product in Japan as a creativity result. Well, delayed copying of a Japanese hit product is not Richard Green's definition of creativity. It is Harvard's definition of creativity, but it's not mine. That's because Harvard doesn't hire smart people. It doesn't hire effective people. It hires people with the most elite research methods. And that's all you get from Harvard. Elite research methods that don't work and nobody reads the stuff. Now, number three, it's not even that they're ineffective. A lot of the results from our elites are actually harmful and evil. A lot of these hobby wars from Vietnam, Iraq, where you take the world's most competent military and you make them losers at tremendous cost to them and the nation. Why? That's the elites running the military that are making them losers. And so we've got real evidence. I mean, dead people, solid evidence that the elites that we have been generating don't know what they're doing and are not competent. The 2008 $13 trillion stolen from the world's population by Harvard elites and University of Chicago Friedman-style right-wing elites on Wall Street, using economics as a cover story for personal greed. We've not recovered that 13 trillion. It's gone from all of us. The retirements for the baby boom generation given to bankers on Wall Street. Harvard elites stole it and had enough political power to keep it stolen. None of them have gone to prison for any of that. You steal $20 from a convenience store, you go to prison for a year. You steal $13 trillion from the baby boom generation, and nobody goes to prison, not one person. So we have really big evidence that our elites don't work. Why is everyone copying American elites then? Australia, Spain. Why? What's wrong with these idiots? Well, number one, you can measure the intelligence of a foreign nation by whether they are copying the Americans. If they are, they can't think. And if they're not, then they can think or they're lazy, one of the two. But at least there's a possibility they really can think. The Swiss tend to not copy the Americans. The Germans don't copy the Americans. The people in Holland don't copy the Americans. The rest of Nordic Europe seems to be copying the Americans rather foolishly. So that's, in short, the case for it's a sick system and some real fundamental changes need to occur. Now I go to, my personal fixes, which are not very great given the scale of the problem, but it's the best I could do. In that context, what do you do to fix it? Number one, we generate, as Herbert Simon said in Sciences of the Artificial, narrow people, too narrow for the problems we face. So I've used structural cognition tools I invented myself to fix my own narrowness and the narrowness of MIT when I went there and the University of Michigan when I went there. But I also teach them to all my graduate students so that they use structural cognition tools to be more comprehensive, more varied, and more detailed all at the same time than their competitors at Harvard or Stanford are. Number two, I have a 2-year research process because advising didn't work. Letting an ignorant person who's never done research flop around trying to sort of maybe do research, but they're not sure what it is very ineffective. The best PhD students are done in Nobel labs where the head of the lab is very directive. He knows the field and he's powerful enough to make your idea publishable and be the basis of a career, even if it's wrong. So you do what he says, and they're very directive compared to the average professor. So this free form, go do what you want, explore, and then I'll give you some advice when you bring it to me, sounds very creative, but in fact it wastes a lot of time. And if students have never experienced research, they don't know what they're exploring. They're not really exploring. They're just flopping around lost. So I created an every 2 weeks assignment, 2-year course curriculum in research with 4 or 5 major decision points where you're collecting information on alternatives and making a decision and then justifying and testing it and getting it edited by experts and read their written comments on whether it's the right decision or not. And so I've got a 2-year process. You have an assignment every 2 weeks. If you bring that assignment in, we go to the next assignment for you. If you don't have the assignment, I will not talk to you. I will not look at your face. I will not have you in the room with me. I will not communicate in any way, shape, or form unless you bring in the assignment that's due. When you bring it in, I talk. So I do not advise people who don't do work. And I do not give advice that people ignore. You ignore my advice, I don't give you any more advice. It's that simple. Now, you can disagree with my advice, but there are procedures for doing that. And they have to be reasoned. You have to write. You can't just sort of disagree in a lazy manner. You got to disagree and write it. I got that from Ed Shills, who gave me 10 years of research in sociology for free, just because he liked the way my mind worked, and he and I liked things, and I was learning a lot from it. So some of these practices come from really, really smarter people than me. Number 3, formal methods for finding the tipping points in the theory of a field, where one new bit of theory will change the whole state of theory in a field, and formal methods for finding the tipping point in the practices of a field, where one new practice will change the whole thrust of practice in the field or a part of the field. I teach formal methods for tipping point finding, and I aim all the research of my students at theory tipping points and practice tipping points both. The next 4th one or 5th one is creativity, testing the creativity of the results that you get, and testing the impact on theory and the impact on practice of the results. But I actually formally test with 60 models to the extent to which and the amount of creativity in the results, theory results you're getting, and in the practice results you're getting. Then using the data you choose to collect, who you collect it from, what data you collect, to build a consulting business. Anybody with a brain ought to be able to choose who they're going to get data from and how they're going to interact and get what data to get from them, so that after a year or two of getting that data, they've built a personal network that then hires them as a consultant for the next 10 years after their PhD is done. Me and my friend at Procter & Gamble found a guy at Harvard, lots of guys at Harvard and Berkeley that had done this. It's perfectly doable. Then the 5 new interfaces. All of my research with my students is done so that we replace meetings with scientific rules of order, and discussions with stratified responding, and classes and processes with mass workshop events, and brainstorms with social design automata, and prose text writing with fractal page forms. This is just my small toolkit for making research directed at tipping points, having impact, being published in the sense that you've already got a giant 10-year consulting relationship with 5 organizations as a result of how you collected your data, what data you collected. There's simply no reason to have sloppy, miserable, vague, incompetent research done. My 2-year process means that 90% of the dissertation is written by the end of 2 years for all of my students. That's a delight for them, and it's a delight for me. If there's a needed change of direction, we've got really concrete stuff learned and done to change direction from. So we'll often get 1 or 2 papers of the wrong direction, plus another, if we add a year to change the direction, another wonderful paper and dissertation from the new direction. So we don't lose. We get profit because everything is well structured and done competently. And then what methods are chosen very strategically, and not just for convenience or because it's the only method the students heard of or run into. It works for me. I'm not saying it'll work for everybody, and God knows there are a lot of smarter people than me in Nobel Labs, and you better listen to them and not listen to me for that stuff. But for the topics that I'm interested in and good at, one last thing I've got as a tool. I made a list of my 4,000 favorite research books and divided them under the 450 topics that I'm interested in. So I have 450 intellectual interests, and I've categorized my 4,000 favorite research books under those 450 interests. And I use that to advise students when they come to me saying what to read, or when they come to me even dumber saying I couldn't find anything to read. Well, I found 400 books. I found 200 books on this topic, 50 books on that topic. So I've got that printed up. Actually, you can look at it on scribe.com. It's posted on the web. You can't download it, but you can look at it. And I use that sheet of paper with those 450 of my intellectual interests and my 4,000 favorite books with students all the time to advise them on reading. It's making advising reading. You just check off things on that list under the topics that are relevant. So in 5 minutes, I can easily give very high quality advice on 50, 70 books to read. Whereas I used to just have to struggle, scratching my head. There was a good book on that 2 years ago by some guy at Stanford. What was it? What was it? I don't do that anymore. Now I can instantly give them 75 things uh, under 10 different categories to read very, very specifically and precisely. And it's much better advice, much higher quality advice. And it's a style thing, seeing that I've written down my 450 intellectual interests, seeing that I've got the books for them, seeing that I've read the books on them, shows that the role of reading in life, that students are not used to doing reading, and they're doing fake reading, and they got away in undergraduate school with fake reading. I tend to require my students to do 2 to 3 key chapters per book, build a structural reading diagram of the main 200 points of each of those 3 chapters. So I get 3 diagrams per book over 2 years, a total of maybe 100 diagrams from each student for the literature part review. I don't take I read the book as a proof that they read it. I take 3 diagrams of the 200 main points of 3 key chapters in the book, and I don't allow them to diagram the easiest chapters or the introductory or the preface or something like that.